Right, my friend. Thank you for coming all the way here to what looks like Glasgow, to be honest. It's no different, is it?
It is today no different from Glasgow, indeed. It is...
Dreich.
Feels very much at home. Yeah, Dreich is the word, absolutely. We got plenty of experience of this.
Are you from Glasgow?
No, I've been there 20 years, but I grew up in the other place.
Edinburgh?
In Edinburgh, I did, yeah.
Posh.
Well, not really posh. More east end of Edinburgh for me. But yeah, as they say across in Glasgow, there's only one good thing comes out of Edinburgh, and that's the train to Glasgow. So I took it, and I've been there for 20 years.
Yeah, it was really funny. Like when I was a med student, it only went one way. And what I mean by that is you could only become a med student who went to Edinburgh as a doctor. The Edinburgh students never came to Glasgow. They weren't interested.
That's right. I trained in Aberdeen, and we had lots of, not many Glaswegians, some in the undergraduate course, but when we were doing postgrad training, Glaswegians who came to Aberdeen always wanted to get back to Glasgow. They just, you know, I guess it's a bit like down here in London. Bigger cities are always a drawback to people, aren't they? So yeah. The Ouija's always wanted to go home.
Yeah. So I came down in 2001 for 6 months, 26 years old, on my birthday, and I packed my car, and I said to Mom, I'll see you in 6 months, and she just looked at me and went, you'll never be back. And I was like, well, that's very negative. I was like, you know, I'll see you in 6 months. She went, no, it's not happening.
Interesting.
She knew.
Yeah. Well, mothers know, don't they?
They do know.
Yeah.
So listen, I don't know, like, what's your title? You're a minister?
I am, yeah.
So I don't know, do I say reverend? What do I say?
No, you just call me William, that's fine. Technically, on paper, I am the Reverend Doctor, because I was a doctor before I went into medicine. And yeah, I was ordained. But these are things you only use if you're trying to get someone to take you seriously who's not taking you seriously, or whatever it is. But nobody takes it that seriously anyway these days.
But it still carries clout. Still, people think of doctor and that authority figure, and they respect it.
Yeah,
surprisingly,
it's interesting. Yeah, people have. I mean, it's interesting to me when I left medicine to go into a Christian ministry. I had a lot of people who thought that was a terrible thing to do. How could you leave? How could you leave medicine? And still, you know, not that many people who are very impressed that I did theological training, but when they discover I was a doctor, they suddenly take you a bit more seriously. Interesting, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, mate, can I ask you something? What do you think of people's responses when I tell them I've left being an orthopedic surgeon, consultant surgeon, to be a podcaster? They just look at me like,
yeah,
what?
I know, it's a strange thing, isn't it? But it tells you, it explains a lot. It explains a lot about the herd behavior of doctors, doesn't it? Because to turn your back on the profession it's not well received, is it?
So I've talked about this, and then what I've explained is that medicine is actually a form of a cult, and to go outside of the faith is really frowned upon. It's like, why would you do that? We're superior. We're better. We're the chosen ones. You're just going to become an ordinary person. Like, how could you do that? And it's also not a place where you can call out problems and flaws and faults. Again, in a cult, because in a cult, you have to conform, you have to obey the leadership. And if you question the leadership, you get punished. And not by the leadership, but by your fellow cult members.
Yeah.
And medicine is very much like that, I think. You know?
I think it has, it seems to me it's become much, much more like that. You don't seem to have many mavericks around. I mean, those are the people I remember when I was training.
Yes.
I qualified in 1990, so it's a long time ago. And, you know, my first few jobs were with what you would call old-style consultants who still in those days had some influence and, you know, actually ran the show.
Yeah.
And there was a bad side to that because they could be quite kind of omnipotent. But, you know, some of them were incredible individuals. They had immense skills, and they weren't afraid to go against the grain. One of the first consultants I was an SHO for, one of his most common words in response to anything. When he asked you something on a ward round, he gave a response was just bollocks. And he just didn't suffer fools gladly. He had no nonsense. And you know how when you're a junior doctor, you tend to do endless investigations unnecessarily. Serum rhubarb, we used to call it. You know, you just think of everything. You're training. You know, you're studying for your membership exams, and your head's full of all these kind of weird conditions that never happen in reality, but only happen in the MRCP. So you'd be doing all these ridiculous things, and he would call you out on everything. He would demand a full rational explanation of why you were doing this test. And, you know, there was a lot more, I think, still of that sort of the art of being a real physician. That particular consultant believed it was great to do his outpatient clinic because instead of having, 50 enormous sets of notes of people coming back for endless reviews, there'd be very, very few because he said, no, people come here, we sort them out and we discharge them.
Yeah.
And so those days I think are gone now. It's very hard. We used to, after his ward round, he used to go into the sister's office in the ward, and the two of them would sit there and chain smoke for about 10 minutes. And when smoking was banned in the hospital, he couldn't do that, but he did it in his own office. He would go into his own office, and the window would be open. Go through a thick wall of smoke, But a guy like that would have been sacked, long ago now in today's world. And I think conformity has become a very big thing in medicine, and it appears to me that to go against the grain is very, very difficult, and the grain is set by higher powers, isn't it?
It is, absolutely. And while you're talking, I was just thinking back of all the kind of maverick professors and consultants, and they're just amazing. Like, Alistair Beattie, gastroenterologist, he was amazing. His son Douglas was in my class at school. That was interesting. He was just such a funny individual, unusual, different, larger than life.
Yeah, there were lots of those.
And Professor Birch, he was a peripheral nerve injury. He would smoke like crazy, and he used to, come on, let's go for a walk. I need some fresh air, which meant a cigarette.
Yeah.
But they were autonomous, don't you think? In those days, the consultants, they actually were they consulted. And they had respect from the management class. The management asked, they deferred to the consultants, and they ran the show. And I looked at them when I was a junior. I'm not that far behind you. I graduated in 98. But what I did see was very rapidly, like literally within 2-3 years, stripping away. I found that, the consultant with his office, with the big wooden desk, and suddenly he was hot desking. He was complaining about the fact that he has to share an office with 3 other consultants. Yep. And then suddenly even his office just disappeared. There was no more hot desking. Yep. And we had a common room, and it was wonderful. We'd sit and chat with people from different specialities and discuss things informally and learn from each other. Suddenly there's no more common room. There's no more doctor's room. Yeah. There was no more, there was nurses' accommodation and doctors' accommodation. We would get together. There was camaraderie. There was teamwork. Suddenly the accommodation went, and that sounds silly to some people, but it meant the team structure went away. It meant instead of it being a vocation, a life, it became I'm clocking on and clocking off. Yeah. It's not my responsibility anymore. Yeah. Little things like that. And I don't know if you noticed that.
Oh, definitely. I think a lot of it was down to the European Working Time Directives and all that, which meant you had to have shift systems then, and then that ruined everything. I mean, when I was a houseman, okay, you worked ridiculous hours. You were on call every third night. But you were off 2 out of 3 weekends, so you had a little bit of normal time. So when you were on. It was terrible. You were on for a long, long, long time. But you got tons of experience. You were on with the same team, so there was a team structure. Your team knew your patients because you looked after your ward and the ward next door at night, perhaps. But now people are on for shifts here, there, and everywhere. When they're on, they're covering endless patients. They've never met them before. I mean, whenever I because I'm a minister, I often find myself in hospitals, visiting people who are in hospitals, folk in the congregation and others. And I always ask them, the first thing I ask them when they're in hospital, I say, who's your consultant? And you know what? They never know.
I know.
They never know. They have no idea. I say, which doctors are visiting you? And they don't even know their names. Or it's the doctor comes in and says, hello, my name's John. It's not, I'm Dr. So-and-so. So there's no continuity. And I thought until recently that, well, at least there was continuity with the consultants.
No.
But a friend of mine now who's just retired as a consultant just laughed and said, oh, that's absolutely ridiculous. So, he said that whoever's on the post-take ward round wasn't on the night before seeing the patient for the first time. So, I mean, it's not rocket science that if you introduce a system whereby every doctor who sees a patient is seeing them for the first time and working through everything again, it's not really a recipe for good medical care. And it's certainly not a good recipe for efficiency in the health service, is it? Because everything takes much, much longer because, you've never seen them before. So
100%.
There's all kinds of things. I mean, some of them are structural. Some of them are just, I think destroying
cultural.
I think destroying professionalism is a very big thing, isn't it? As soon as you have the mentality of, I work these hours and I clock on and clock off, you've totally changed.
Get rid of your white coat.
Yeah.
Bare below the elbows.
Yeah.
We're all a team.
Yeah.
You're not important. Like, who do you think you are? Like, it was just, I don't know. I my wake up call was literally my first year as a consultant. And I was telling a manager, look, this is how I want to treat my patients. I'm not happy about this. I want to do this. And they went, no, that's the mistake you've made. These aren't your patients. These are the hospital's patients.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you're employed by the hospital to treat our patients. And I was devastated because in my naive brain, I thought these were my patients.
Yeah.
But they don't want you to think like that. And the problem is when you take away that ownership, then you're like, well, it's not my problem. It's like, someone will take up the slack. And the way the system worked was, when you're on call for a few days. And then once you finish, that's it. The baton gets passed, the patient gets passed on to another consultant. And that continuity of care just disappears. And even like junior doctors when they're on call, I remember I used to come in early, do the ward round, see who'd come in overnight, check their history, check their bloods, go around in the ward round, and I knew every fact. If they were going to ask me, what's the CRP or what's the hemoglobin? You know what it was like. Come on,
Yeah, absolutely.
Because the consultant would look at you, the registrar would look at you, the matron would look at you, and you're like, and you would impress them by rattling off all the facts. So tell me what medication they have. You tell them, have they got any allergy? You just and then if you impress them after a few weeks by showing them that you've done the ward round, you know all the information, you've done the blood, maybe you can go to theatre and assist, and you earned that. Thing. Whereas now, honestly, when I was a consultant, it was like, so folks, so can someone tell me about this patient? Blank stare. Nurse is like, I'm sorry, I don't know. I've just come on to do the shift. Where's the matron? She's doing management stuff.
Well, I mean, that was interesting because
the doctors have just come on. The person who was on overnight has gone home, and they were just like, "What?"
Yeah. When you're a junior doctor, or when I was, that used to be one of the most irritating things. Because was to hear you'd ask a nurse about a patient, and they would say, "I don't know. I've just come on shift, or I've been off shift." I used to think that's so annoying because I don't have that luxury. I have to know everything about these patients because the consultant's going to ask me.
Yeah.
But now you find that you get the same answers from the doctors, and I think that's it's not just bad for patients. It's bad for your whole sense of esteem of doing what you're doing. It depersonalizes it. And I think that's that is a big problem. You mentioned it when you said it was the hospital treating. So the hospital is a depersonalized entity. You made the patient the same thing. You're just a functionary, rather than actually having personal responsibility for these people. And that's it's the essence of bureaucracy, isn't it? It's all about avoiding responsibility. Everybody wants authority for everything, but to take no responsibility for anything. And those two things, they have to go together always. You must never give somebody authority if they're not going to have the responsibility to take the rap. But you must never make somebody be responsible for something that they have no control over. I mean, it's a fundamental principle of life, isn't it? And we've lost sight of a lot of these things.
So many.
It's certainly something that well, in Christian ministry, it's the same. Actually, it's you need to be able to take responsibility and be able to make decisions and say, well, look, it's on me if it goes wrong, but this is what I think we need to do. This is what I think is best for you.
But you know what I really don't like is in the world today, and particularly in the NHS, people would say the right things. they would have nice sounding slogans, patient first,
Yeah.
patient at the heart of the
Yeah.
care, all this kind of stuff, the management speak, the gobbledygook, and, the pamphlets, the slides up there, and you'd read it and you go, oh, that sounds good. That's great. Yes. Noble intention. But the reality was a complete inversion of that. That's what I was so frustrated with. And when I was in the management system, because I was head of the department at one point, and I'd go to all these meetings, I would see the inversion everywhere. And it would drive me crazy. But like, you talk about us, helping the patients, but all you're doing is trying to stop operating on them or get them off the waiting list and kick them back out into the system and make them jump through more hoops. How is that helpful for the patient? This is about balancing your budget. That's what it's all about. And they would look really uncomfortable because I'm stating the truth. But they always couch it in such a way that it's the opposite. And I just found the inversions frustrating.
It's like the old sketch in Yes, Prime Minister. Do you remember the one years ago where he's getting shown around the hospital and it's all fantastic and new and clean and wonderful machines and all the rest of it. And then he says, oh, where are the patients? Oh, we don't have any patients. What do you mean? Why not? Oh, it's much more efficient not to have patients. Everything works really well without patients. But isn't that what a hospital's supposed to be for? Oh, no, Prime Minister, it's not about patients.
Exactly.
And it's ridiculous, isn't it? But actually, it's sometimes it feels like that. But
and don't get me wrong, look, I'm not looking back with rose-tinted glasses and thinking the 80s were perfect. I'm sure there were problems then, and the 90s. But I just feel like things have snowballed really out of control. Like it's all protocol driven, guideline driven, lack of autonomy. And if you do not conform, if you're an outlier, if you're a maverick in any way, not just if you're performing badly, but even if you're performing too well, it's not acceptable. Everybody needs to be the same. Everybody needs to follow the same script. And the problem that I find in that approach to healthcare and to research even is that public health, there's no such thing as public health. There's no such thing as the mass, the blob. Every human being is an individual. Every human being needs to be treated as an individual. And that's gone out of medicine.
There's multiple reasons, isn't there? But I think underlying some of it is that we have got a sort of, there's money issues, obviously, but there's a fundamental question, I think, which is perhaps the great question of our age, and that is, people have lost sight of what it actually means to be human. And, we have a very reductionist view, and medicine has become very reductionist. It's about treating diseases, not treating people. It's about treating, just systems of the body and not people as a whole. And that reflects a wider confusion in society. I mean, that's what's lying behind so many of the kind of absurdities of what's going on in our age today. People are very confused about their own identity. Who are they? What am I? The trans business and all of that. It's just one aspect of that. And I mean, obviously, I'm a Christian preacher and theologian, and I am because I believe that the worldview that's given us in the Bible actually is the one that explains the world. And I think it certainly explains what it means to be human. But if you look at our modern secular society in the West today, in where we live, people have almost turned that on its head. So,
again, inversions,
exactly. So I mean, just very basically, you don't go very far in the Bible in the early chapters of Genesis. So it tells us what the world is all about. So it tells us that human beings are created in the image of God. It tells us that we're created as spiritual beings. In other words, we're for a relationship with God. We're social beings. We're created for relationships with one another. We're moral beings. We're created to have personal responsibility for ourselves and for others, and indeed for the world. Well, if you think about a lot of the way, particularly driven, and I think in an extreme way, by the sort of what I would call the green religion, which is so widespread today, and it is a religion, it's an ideology, a belief system, but it's turning that upside down. So, at Christian theology, the Bible teaches that man is made as the crown of God's creation. The green world, especially in its extremes, is saying no, man is a cancer on creation.
Absolutely,
upside down. The Bible says,
I'm getting goosebumps just hearing you say that.
Yeah, so it's an inversion and a back to front of Genesis 1. So the green ideology wants to destroy what we would call the creation mandate, that God creates human beings and says, fill the earth and subdue it. Well, the green ideology says, no, we must do the opposite of that. Man is the problem who's destroyed the earth, so the earth must be allowed to rule man. Rewilding, getting rid of even animals because they produce too much CO2 and all of that.
How about
that's the problem?
How about the big one? The big one is there's too many of us.
Well, that's.
So I have had a conversation with someone who describes themselves as a good Christian, goes to church 2-3 times a week, gets involved in all the activities, and they confidently said to me, the problem that we face today is that there's too many human beings, and there needs to be less of us. If there's less human beings, the world will be a better place. And I turned around to him and said, I think that's the most unchristian-like thing you could say. That is ungodly.
Yes,
can you not hear that? And they just looked at me like, what are you talking about? Because I think they're following more than just the religion of Christianity. I'm so glad you describe it as a green religion, because it really is. It's another cult. Yeah. It's another religion.
And these kind of, as has happened all the way through history, is that you get a syncretism, you get a bringing in of false ideologies from the world and baptized into the Christian faith, and people, all kinds of wrong ideas come in. I mean, that is a flat contradiction of the purpose of the world, according to the Bible. God's eternal purpose is that there should be multitudes that no one can number, filling the earth and living to worship the God who has created the world, and as we believe as Christians, who has made himself fully known to the world in the person of Jesus Christ. So as soon as you're onto something when somebody is talking in terms that directly subvert and contradict the very purpose of creation. But that is not, it's not a new thing. The eugenicists of the 19th century, that was their thing. Charles Darwin, everybody remembers his book, The Origin of the Species, but nobody remembers the full title, which was the triumph of the favored races in the quest for life. I mean, these were all eugenicists, the people who pushed eugenics, the people who pushed so-called family planning and all the rest of it, were people who wanted to reduce the population, and particularly to reduce the population of who they consider to be the unfavored races. I mean, if you read the true history of the pro-abortion movement and all these sorts of things in the States 100 years ago and so on, I mean, it's horrific. You're talking about Nazism, which is, of course, why in the early years of the Nazis they were greatly supported by many across the rest of the West.
Yeah, the Wall Street.
Absolutely. So
that's not some crazy conspiracy theory. I think that's well accepted now.
It's just a matter of history, as is, you were talking about the push for depopulation. Many of the most influential, wealthiest people in the world are on record as for decades of having conferences where they're trying to address the problem that they feel world governments don't address adequately, which is overpopulation. And it's quite chilling when you realize that.
We do have an overpopulation problem. I have to admit, it's one of philanthropaths. If we had less of them, I think things would be better. But that's the only overpopulation problem we have.
I mean, it's not new again. It goes right back to Malthus and the whole Malthusian idea that, we'll never be able to.
Wasn't he in the clergy?
Yeah, he was. He was, but he was a liberal, and he wasn't. He was much more tainted by rationalism than by that was the age of Darwin and all the rest of it, when the church in the West started to lose its nerve and said, well, science is now the thing everybody's following, so we're not going to get a look in. So we need to show that we buy into all of this so that we get noticed.
And there's a bit of virtue signaling that you trump the other person by buying into it even more than everyone else is buying into it.
Precisely. And that's always a mistake. When the church has tried to win the world by just becoming like the world and saying the same things as the world, it's never won anything. People look and say, well,
that's confusing.
It's confusing, and also they say, well, if we want what the world offers, let's get it from the world because it does it better. I mean, it's very interesting. You get intelligent people who who have written about Christianity and who have become very, very, very attracted to it. But then they look at the offering of Christianity that they see in front of them, like the Church of England or something, and they say, well, we can't see the difference between that and the Liberal Democrat Party, so let's just join the Lib Dems. I mean, Tom Holland, who wrote the great book Dominion about the history of Christianity and its influence on Western culture and so on, he said exactly that. And I listened to him in a podcast speaking about his experience and his enthrallment really with Christianity, but then his utter disillusion with what he saw in the contemporary church. The church, particularly in the time of COVID, that was trying to bend over itself to so support the government and never critique the government, that he just thought, well, this is pathetic.
We're going to come to that in a second. What I'd like to know is, I would like you to answer what is the nature of man, because you touched upon it, but I'd like you to explain, because you said most people don't know.
Yeah.
And so I'd like that. And I'd also like to know, at what point did you leave medicine? Like, how far into your career? How long had you been a doctor? And why did you decide to become a minister? We'll start off with the nature of man first.
Okay. Well, it's a big question, isn't it? But let me try and anchor it somewhere. So, in Psalm 8, which would be a famous psalm that people might know, the question is asked, what is man that you're mindful of him? So it starts off by extolling the extraordinary creator. I look at the stars, I see the extraordinary creation, and then think, well, what is man that you're mindful of him? You've set him a little lower than the angels, but you've bestowed honor and glory and given him dominion over all the beasts of the field and the fowls of the sea and all of these things. Now that is in a very concise way telling you what the biblical doctrine of man is. So man is a creature, not a heavenly being, lower than the heavenly beings, and yet not a creature like the beasts and the fish and all the rest of it, but crowned with glory and honor above, to have rule over all things in the image of God. So first of all, that tells us, well, man is not God. Man is a creature. But of course, our secular world, our atheistic worldview around us is saying, well, no, man is not special. Man's no different to any other creatures. We've all just come out of the same primordial soup.
I don't buy into that.
But that's the worldview that everybody's taught, isn't it? And that's what's promulgated by Richard Dawkins and so on. We're just DNA. We're just dancing to the tune of our DNA.
But it's so nonsensical. Like the idea that you've got this soupy, gloopy lava mud pools, whatever, and you've got these proteins being made. Yeah. And baking proteins is hard. It's difficult. Yeah. And they just happen to make all these random proteins in the right order, in the right time, and it creates life. I mean, sorry.
It's absurd.
It is absurd.
It is absurd scientifically, but it's also incredibly dangerous in terms of morality and of values, because if human beings are not in any way special, then human life actually is cheap. And so you look around at our society, and we live in a society where human life actually is cheap. I mean, here's one of the most frightening things when you think about what it means to be human. And I'm thinking about this particularly because my eldest daughter is expecting a baby in a few months' time. So
congratulations.
I'm looking forward to being a grandfather. And the appropriate answer to that is, oh, you're far too young to be a grandfather. But I'm looking forward to it. But
I am thinking that.
Yeah, good. I knew you were. But here's the thing. What is the most dangerous place for a human being to be in this entire planet? It's in
a hospital?
It's in the mother's womb.
Oh, is it?
You are more likely to be killed in your mother's womb than any other place on earth.
Really?
Yeah. Approaching half of all human deaths in the world are purposeful abortions.
Oh, right.
In the womb. Now, a culture that can have that outlook is a culture that does not give value to human life.
I'm really glad you're saying this. Like, there will be some people who will be upset, and there's some people who argue that as men we're not allowed to touch this and not allowed to broach this topic because it's got nothing to do with us. Yeah. Well, but as a human being who values all life, I think we should be allowed to talk about it. And just very quickly, sorry for interjecting, but this is a topic that's really dear to me because I was brought up in the Muslim faith, Islamic faith, but I'm not a Muslim anymore, although I believe in God. Just keep it simple. Mm-hmm. And I value all life and all that kind of stuff. And, you know, I accept that there will be some cases where, you know, you might need to do an abortion, especially if the mother's life is in jeopardy. But all too much I see now this drive to just say, you know, yeah, you can make mistakes, and you know what, you can just take a tablet, you can have an abortion, and these abortions are very late. And what I didn't realize is there is an industry behind it. The cosmetic industry and big pharma and vaccines, they use the fetal body parts, fresh fetal body tissue, and it's a massive market. It's a huge market. And then they experiment, they do everything. And we're talking about quite advanced fetuses. And I think, what other societies and civilizations sacrifice their children? And there were many throughout history. And
the ancient, I mean, the Bible is full of that.
Moloch and God knows what else. And I think, how are we any different now? Just because it's done in a clinical setting, are we not sacrificing our children to the beast?
I believe abortion is one example of that, but a very, very big one. But I mean, it's also interesting. We're facing at the moment a draft bill in Scotland, and there's also similar legislation in Westminster pushing for legalization of assisted suicide. So again, you know, where human life is not inherently valuable just because it is created as special and in the image of the Creator. Life is cheapened, and it becomes much, much more easy for you to just have a utilitarian outlook.
Oh, but you know what? They'll couch it in a way that's, you know, to ease the suffering and, you know, the suffering of the person. Because we care, we will allow them to die early at their own hands because we care. Don't you care, William? Are you such a cruel person that you would like to see someone suffer? Do you see how they twist it around, the inversion?
Indeed, it's all twisted, isn't it? But the answer, of course, is to say, no, of course, we don't want people to suffer. We want people to have proper palliative care, and that's a thing that is largely overlooked. And
I'm just looking up something on the internet while you're talking.
Because where there is proper palliative care, and palliative care physicians are very against this kind of thing, because, I mean, it's an enormous slippery slope. There's all sorts of things. But my point is simply that all of this comes back to the question of what it means to be human. And if there is nothing distinct, if humans are just like any other animal, then in the end, there is nothing to stop us being treated like any other animal. But the other thing, of course, is it's not the biblical view of humanity is not just that we're not just beasts and we're not gods. It's also that, you know, we are made to have responsibility for the world. We're made to stand apart from that and to rule. And that is not in any way to exploit, but to do so in God's image means to do what God, the Creator and the owner of the world, wants His world to achieve. And so we're called to that sort of godlike destiny. But of course, again, not only does our secularist worldview deny that we're somehow any different from the beasts, of course, it denies that there's a God at all. So what that means is then that, at least functionally speaking, human beings are at the top of the tree. There's nobody above us. Yeah, that was John Lennon's thing, isn't it? Imagine there's no heaven. Imagine there's nothing above us, only sky.
Yeah.
Well, you know, how's that working out in the world? What that means is you have this strange paradox where human beings are considered just beasts, but because there's no God, we're gods. So what you have is beasts who are in fact God. Beasts with ultimate power. And that's a terrifying picture, isn't it? And actually, if you look back, it doesn't take you long to look back just a century or so to see how that sort of ideology has manifested itself. It's manifested itself in terrible tyrannies, totalitarianisms, not just the Nazis, but communism and so on, and other aspects of that. So by de-godding God and unmanning man, you're left with a bestial power at the top, and that's just raw power, isn't it? And that is a terrifying picture, and that is actually what explains the world. And so, you know, it leaves us with an enormous amount of confusion, both at a personal level and a societal level, because we've no anchor for real morality, no anchor for personal value, we've no anchor for actually what it means to have an identity. And, you know, in the last decade or so, identity crisis is just an enormous thing, isn't it? Now we're beginning.
It's an industry.
People are beginning to. Well, it is an exploitative industry, but people are just beginning, aren't they, to wake up to the madness of some of this, and we've seen some rolling back of the sort of trans business and so on.
Very little.
Very little.
Not enough.
Not nearly enough. But thinking people are looking at that and saying there is an absurdity to this, and actually it is an exploitative, damaging thing, particularly where children are concerned. But you see, we have to get back to the fundamentals that are underlying all of this, saying, well, what actually does it mean to be a human being? What is this? What's this world about? Who am I? Do I matter? Why am I here? Where am I going? I mean, these are people like Richard Dawkins just wants to say things like, we just shouldn't ask these questions. Well, very well, Professor, but people do ask these questions. People are asking these questions all the time and getting very confused about the answers. And it doesn't even have to be adults and philosophical people. We had a fox kill 2 of our chickens 2 days ago. We had a funeral out in the woods. Okay. Listen, these chickens are our pets, and honestly, I cried. Terrible.
I cried like a baby.
Yeah.
I felt so guilty because I forgot to shut the gate.
Oh.
And my daughter, you've just met her. Mm-hmm. She's saying, "Dad, will we meet chocolate in heaven? Will chocolate be there?" And I'm like, "I don't know. I hope so." And she's asking, like, where are we going to go? And then my son, who's even younger, goes, "Dad, is it like going to the airplane and once you go through the gate, you can't go back? You only go one direction?" I was like, maybe, yes. I don't think people come back, but maybe they do. But I think we go somewhere else. And we're having this deep philosophical conversation. They're just kids. And it just goes to show that's the curiosity of the mind. But anyway, very quickly, you said made in God's image and whatnot, but it reminded me of made, a different type of made, medically assisted, a medical assistance in dying. Made, which started in 2016 in Canada. I just want to bring your attention to something. In 2016, 1,000 made deaths. In 2022, 13,000. Last year, it was over 15,000.
Yeah.
You can have made if you are feeling depressed. You can have made if you have debts. Did you know that?
Yeah.
If you have debts, financial problems, and you're stressed about it, it's like Soylent Green. Do you remember Soylent Green, where you just check in time?
Yeah. And
do you think the body's being harvested? I mean, are they just burning it? Are they cremating it? Is there donors? Like, I just don't know what's behind all of this.
Yes, I read a paper recently that said that deaths from assisted suicide in Canada were something like 3% of all deaths, and it was bigger than deaths from diabetes and deaths from pneumonia. I mean, that's astonishing. I forget exactly those things, but it was that kind of order of figures, and increase it. Well,
that's because they're kind.
It's a terribly slippery slope.
They're doing it because they're kind.
Yeah.
See, that's how they pitch it. They always pitch it in a nice way because we care. We care. We're going to let you die.
But it's like the people who constantly say, "Oh, be kind, be kind," unless you disagree with us, in which case, not only will we cancel you, but we will absolutely smash you right over the internet and have everybody against you. But that's being kind.
Yeah.
Words. It's Humpty Dumpty, isn't it? Words can mean anything you want them to mean now. And but that doesn't change reality. And the fact is that people know that what they are is something unique and is something special, and is vastly more than just bodily parts.
So what you've just said, you can say whatever you like, whatever words you like, but it doesn't change reality. It's so funny. That's exactly the tweet that landed me in trouble and got me referred to the GMC. Yeah. Because I like to have a sense of humor. I think in today's day and age, it's actually humor and art and music that cuts through the BS. I found that actually talking to someone with facts and figures and data doesn't work. No. You kind of like have to make them just think and, push the buttons. But maybe I was a bit too controversial. So for example, I put some pictures up on my Twitter account, and there's a lion with blood soaked, Mav, and blood dripping from its teeth. And I said, this lion identifies as a vegetarian. And then I got a young Indian village girl. I literally Googled young Indian village girl, and she's standing in front of some very simple huts in India, And I said, this young Indian village girl identifies as a 6 foot tall Viking. Okay. And the whole point was to make people smile.
Yeah.
Just like you are.
Yeah.
A little snigger. And bring the whole idea that, you know what, you can say whatever you like, but you know what, it doesn't change reality.
Yeah.
It doesn't change reality. Like, and that apparently was enough for me to be referred to the GMC for being transphobic.
Mm-hmm.
This is the world we live in.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it is absurd, isn't it? And we've got to be. We do have to be careful. We have to be compassionate, don't we? Because we live in this terrible victim culture where everyone's claiming victim status, but there are victims, aren't there? Because there are ruthless predatory powers, who are exploiting people and exploiting young people and exploiting vulnerable people, and people have become victims of these things. I mean, somebody, it's a terrible thing, isn't it, when a young child wants to have surgery to mutilate their body, and it's a more terrible thing when their parents are
enabling
are under such a delusion that the right thing is to help them. But that's being driven, isn't it, by something very, very dark.
Very dark.
And I think, well, we shouldn't. Again, this is the thing where, as a Christian, I would need to say, this should not surprise us, because the truth is that out of the human heart can come terrible, terrible things. And I think none of us really want to believe how depraved and how evil and how wicked our own hearts can be, our own thoughts can be. But an honest person knows that, there are lots of things that we think about in our minds that we would never want anybody else to know that we've thought about. There are things that, there are feelings we've had, there are things we've thought of doing that we're too ashamed to admit to other people. So our own
even to ourselves,
and we hide that from ourselves. And so I think that makes it very, very difficult, doesn't it? So we want to have this view that human nature is basically good, because most people are decent people and want to do the right thing. Now, on one level, that's right.
But we all have the capacity to do evil.
We've got the capacity for terrible evil, and
but that's what keeps us different from other animals, because we can keep it in check, and that's where the morals come in and the values come in.
Yeah, and there is a restraining influence of moral values that are preserved and taught in society, and in our own culture here, the foundations of what we have believed about right and wrong has been built on biblical faith, really. We've got a Christian heritage in this country, even though we've never been a Christian country. People, that's not a term that's really we should use. We were never a Christian country in the sense that most people here were Christians, but we were a Christianized country, and that our culture was formed by that. But that's changed very rapidly, and the kind of the paradox really is that, and the irony is that the sort of very woke, hyper liberal people today pushing their agendas, they don't really realize that they can only do that because, in fact, of the foundations of the freedoms and the thought forms that they've inherited. But they don't realize that if you knock the foundations out of a building, the bits that you want to stay up are not going to stay up on their own anymore. And so you can't strip out fundamental matters of worldview and of theology and of ethics and morality out of a society and expect it to continue to produce the valued fruit of that. And so that's part of the problem today. We've got a crisis of people not realizing that. And one of the things that we won't face up to is the reality of evil, and especially the reality of the evil inside us. One of the things I've observed, interestingly, over the last 4 or 5 years, particularly coming out of all the chaos of the COVID event. I don't like to call it the pandemic because
pandemic.
I don't really any longer. Well, I've got so many questions, but the chaos that was inflicted on on our country, many others, is that thoughtful people who've looked at it and just thought this cannot add up, this cannot all just be as it's cracked up to be, have increasingly found themselves having to use the language of metaphysics, the language of evil. Following the money and all the rest of it can get you so far,
right?
But people have had to resort to the language of this is wickedness, there's evil going on here.
I'm one of them.
Yeah, and so
money on its own cannot explain it enough.
Yeah, I mean, money and the lust for power and corruption can corrupt very, very greatly. And the Bible, Apostle Paul says the love of money is a root of all kinds of evils. It's not quite as people often say money is the root of all evil, but the love of money, and it's not, and that's not just a love for things that money can get you. It's a lust for power and for it's a lust for godlikeness, really, because vast wealth allows you to be your own god. And we see that today. I mean, there are godlike people, aren't there? Billionaires who they don't have to keep restrictions for COVID. They can go in their private jets wherever they like. They can tell us all to not eat meat and, freeze to death, but they can still go, they're in a different plane. But people who look at all of this and think seriously, inductively, find themselves saying, I can't just explain this without recourse to something beyond. There's something behind this. There's something dark. There's something that brings about this wickedness. There is a dark power. And that's true, but it's a very frightening thing if that's where you stop. And that's where I think I, as a Christian pastor, would want to say all of that is true, and it's terrifying, it's real, it's unavoidable, but there is hope. There is hope, because beyond that, there is something greater still. And really, once you've come to the point where you see the full extent of the darkness that surrounds the world and humanity, it is a point of despair unless there is hope. And what I would want to say is, well, there is, and that's, you come back to asking how long I was in medicine and why I left and so on, and the answer really is that, because that message of hope is in my understanding, my belief, is the only ultimate healing for any human being and this whole world. So I didn't leave medicine because I was disillusioned with it. Actually, it was a long time ago. Things were much better than they were now. I loved it. I enjoyed it. I was in cardiology. I was training as a cardiology registrar. But for me, this became so much more important that it had to take primary place. And for me personally, I was getting involved in more and more teaching of the Christian gospel, teaching of the Bible, and so on. I came to the point where I knew I can't do both of these things, because medicine, if you're going to do it properly, it does consume you. For a long time, I wrestled with it. I thought, well, maybe I thought I would go abroad. I thought I'd be a missionary doctor. I come from a long line of missionary family in Africa. My original thought was I can do that. I can do my medicine. I can preach the gospel to people. I can teach people about the greater things, about salvation. I can show them the hope that's in Christ. Eventually, I realized that for me anyway, I could never do both of those things properly, and so ultimately it was medicine that had to give way. And people, whenever people said to me, "Oh, but being a heart doctor, that's such an important thing," I'd say, "Yeah, it was great," and I could sometimes start people's heart again. I could keep people's hearts going a bit longer, but I could never do that for very long. And there was always going to become an ultimate problem that I couldn't solve. I wanted to say, look, I want to give my life to the ultimate healing, which really is the message of hope in the face of that terrible darkness, the darkness out there, but also the darkness deep in our hearts, in the sense of the way the Bible uses the word heart isn't a beating heart, but it's the center of our being. It's our control center. It's who we are. It's everything about what we are and what makes us tick. And that's where the problem really is. And so it's only, in my view, the Christian gospel that gives us the answer to that. We can't find that. We can see so far ourselves. We can see and evaluate the darkness. We can come to a sense of, that's what the Bible calls sinfulness, human sinfulness and evil. It's the way that we've been tainted by that dark power. But we can't solve it. We can't solve it even just through instruction of well, here's the right way, go this way and you'll be fine. Because what we find out very quickly is we can't even live up to our own expectations of ourselves. Never mind actually what God expects from us. And so we're left helpless in despair. But the answer that the Christian faith gives, the answer that Christ gives is, well, you're right. You cannot do it. You cannot save yourself. But I have come to save you. What does that mean? Well, you're guilty before God. And you deserve punishment. You deserve to be banished from God. And in fact, you must be, because his goodness and holiness and beauty cannot coexist alongside anything that besmirches that so much. But I have come to take that away for you. That's why, we would say that the incarnation, the God becoming human, is a very, very difficult thing for people to understand. And it's a very, very big sticking point with people who are Jewish, as well as people who come from an Islamic background, because
I've spoken to many Christians who also struggle with it.
Yeah, well, we all struggle with it because it's a mind-blowing concept, but it's at the very heart of the Christian faith.
Right.
Why must God become man? Well, he must become man because the problem is in man, and the problem can only be dealt with from man's side. Man has to, if there's justice in the eternal universe, human beings must be punished, must pay the penalty for that sin, because we have a deep sense of justice, don't we? So when there's...
Can I be honest with you?
Yeah.
I just don't get all of that.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter how many times I hear it from different people in different ways. It just still doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah.
It just is. I just don't get it. I don't personally believe that one person has come and by dying, then that absolves us of our sin. That doesn't make sense to me. Well, I don't believe in the Trinity. It's never made sense to me. And so anyway, listen, before I don't really want to get into theological things. The thing is, everyone thinks their issue is the ticker tape, that the flag they want to pin to the mast. And I'm not talking about religion. I'm talking about, say, for example, I don't believe there's viruses. It's all about no virus. And if you're not talking about no virus, you're part of the problem. Yeah. Or early treatment. We need early treatment. It's all about early treatment, Or there was no such thing as a pandemic. Everybody's got their little field of speciality. It's nanotech. It's all about nanotech. Oh, if you're not talking about 5G, you're part of the problem because it's 5G. If we crack that, so everybody wants to think that their thing is the thing. And right, you've seen my daughter. I've got 3 kids. I've studied lots of different religions, and I just think there is a God, the creator, and they must love us. Like, they created all of this for us. And one of the things that really stuck with me with all the religions that I looked at, particularly Islam as well, and Judaism, and, Christianity, like, you need to worship God. You need to worship God. And if you don't worship God, you're going to go to hell. You need to do this and that. And you can pick up any page of the Quran. If you're not worshiping God, hell. And the thing is, I've got children. I'm a creator in some respect, but I don't want anything from them. I don't want them to worship me. They don't need to worship me at all. I will give them unconditional love. And I am just a mere mortal. I think God is infinitely bigger and more gracious and more merciful and more loving. And if I'm flawed, he'll look down at me and go, son, I made you this way. It's not your fault you're flawed. I designed you like this. You were meant to be. If you were perfect, you would have been an angel. If you were perfect, you would have been a godlike. I created you in this form that is imperfect. So why am I going to get upset with you and punish you and you have to worship me? I love you, all your flaws, and you have choice on this planet. And that's the thing. That's why we're different. We have choice. We get to choose what we do. And sometimes we make mistakes and sometimes we get it wrong. And if we do things right more often, we get blessed and we will go to heaven for it. And if we do things badly more often, then and who knows what the form of hell will be. Maybe hell will be the lack of God's love and presence, I mean, I don't know. I don't even know. But anyway, what I did notice is all the religions during the COVID years in lockstep behaved in a manner that was totally contrary to what their teachings were, whichever religion, Judaism, Islam, Christianity, whatever. I always joked, if Jesus came down during the COVID pandemic, I don't think he'd be using alcohol gel. I don't think he'd be wearing a mask. I don't think he'd be saying worship in front of the holy grail of the vaccine. And
No, certainly wouldn't.
the man who washed the leper's feet, and I don't see him doing this.
Yeah.
So how could all these religious figures do the exact opposite to their teachings? And so I have a problem with religion. I think it's been captured by man and maybe even more evil forces. And, you talk about Christianity, but the reality is Christianity is such a, it doesn't even exist.
Sure.
What type of Christianity? There's so many different forms and shapes.
But you put your finger on it, you see, when you brought us to Jesus. And so you said, I don't think Jesus will be doing these things. And I think that's the absolute key. Put aside Christianity, put aside organized leadership, put aside all of these things, all of whom are corrupted. And the truth about the real Christian faith is that, look, it is all about Jesus. It's not about what he would do, but it's what he did do. It's what he did say. It's what he said. So, yes, and what he said is that, God so loved the world. You're right, but he so loved the world that he came to save, because it is what it is. It is corrupted, and I think obviously you're picking up on part of the picture when you say, as a father, you have unconditional love for your kids. But you wouldn't feel that about somebody who came and murdered one of your children, would you? You'd want justice for that. You'd want there to be rightly and properly somebody to pay the price for that. You wouldn't be saying, I don't think, to the judge when the verdict comes in the court, guilty of horrific murder. You wouldn't be saying
they're not my creation, though.
Well, yeah, they're not. But that's right. But also, I think you would. You have a desire for your own children. You don't want them. That's why you're teaching them well. That's why you're wanting to bring them up, because you don't want them to become murderers. You don't want them to become something that is the very opposite of what you are. You certainly don't want them to come and stick a knife into you. So you recognize that you want justice. There is justice in the universe. There's a great demand for justice within all of us, isn't there? I mean, we want justice, of course, for other people. We're not so keen on it for ourselves most of the time. But there is a fundamental issue there. And so if there's justice, if there's morality, if there's meaning right at the very heart of the universe, there must be judgment. And that is the real problem, that for things to be right, there must be judgment. But then if the problem of evil and wickedness is not just out there, but also in here, then that means there must be judgment that touches me as well. And I, of course, will want to absolve myself and say, well, the things I've done are not so bad, certainly not as bad as what he's done or she's done. But the ultimate issue really is, well, who's the judge and who's the one who decides how serious that is?
So what's the right form of Christianity? Because there's Roman Catholicism, there's Protestant, there's Greek Orthodox, there's Coptic.
Yeah, and the reason for that is that there's been differences in various understandings of various things. But the things that unite them all together are vastly, vastly more than the things that separate them. I would just want to say, look, we've got to be humble. None of us can say my particular slant on everything is the only thing in the whole world that is right and true. That would just be arrogant, wouldn't it? We've got to be able to hold convictions, but do so in a way that recognizes that we're fallible. We're God. I would simply say, look, you go back as much as possible to the original thing. Go back to the Bible. See what Jesus really is saying. See what he does.
So I've been reading stuff, and you see the pile of books here. This is just a fraction of my books, and some of the books some of the articles and stuff that I've been reading is about the origin of Christianity, and it's so complicated. I wasn't aware, for example, that there was a massive debate about the Trinity.
Oh yeah,
huge.
Yeah,
and it was pushed by the priesthood from Alexandria in Egypt, actually. And there were people who did not believe in the Trinity. And we're talking about 200-300 years after Jesus died. We're not talking about, and they were punished and they were tortured for believing in that way. And if they didn't conform to the Trinity, they found themselves in a difficult position. And it's just, and then you have the Council of Nicaea, then they're thrashing out what the Bible will be, and that's like 400 years later. And what I'm trying to say is, we think we know what history is. And, I thought I knew about the Second World War and the First World War and the revolutions and the French Revolution. And now it's coming to light that everything we thought we knew about even just the last 200 years isn't quite what it seems. And I think I'm in that place now where the more I know, the less I know. I'm at that point where I just put my hands up and say, I don't really know. I'm kind of guided by a certain belief system and value system.
Yeah.
But I'm not going to say I'm right and it's my way. And I think there's a danger of all religions, and particularly the monotheistic ones. Not so much things like Taoism and Buddhism, but for example, I remember Elaine in my secondary school. She once came up to me in the physics class and said, "You're going to go to hell because you don't believe in Jesus." And I was like, "Oh, wow." And how's that different from someone who's fanatical Muslim fundamentalist? That, if you don't believe in the Holy Prophet, but again, it comes back to my idea of the Creator and God, who is more kind, more patient. And you know what? Says, Ahmed, you know what? You've been a really good human being. You've conducted yourself mostly, you're not perfect, but you've conducted yourself in a way that, makes me happy. And you know what? Maybe you don't quite believe in the Trinity, but I'm going to let it fly. And you know what? You get through the doors and you realize you were wrong, and then you can high five me. And I was like, well, damn it, I was wrong. You were right. Thank you very much. I think God's going to be more like that rather than, sorry, the gates are closed because you didn't believe in the Trinity. Forget all the good stuff you did. The fact you didn't believe this.
Yeah, I think you're slightly caricaturing there.
a little bit.
Yeah, again, I just say don't judge Jesus by some of his more foolish followers. And
So do you think I can go to heaven?
Well, let me put it this way. So what I think the true Christian message is not you're going to go to hell. The true Christian message is, I don't want you to go to hell. I've opened the way. I've opened the way to heaven. I've done everything for you. You don't have to do anything. You just have to be humble and say, thank you. And take this from me. Now, you see, that's a very different message, isn't it? Because it's not a message about your pedigree. It's not a message about your background. It's not a message about your performance. It's a message of personal response. And again, I think it's helpful to crystallize the difference between religion, and by that I mean all religion, and what I would call real Christianity, which I would say is not religion.
And also
revelation.
Church and mosque politics and synagogue politics and all of that garbage.
But you see, if I can put it in a very simple way, all religion is man reaching up to heaven to find his way to God, to get into heaven. It goes way, way back to the Tower of Babel. That's what the Tower of Babel was, imagery of reaching up to the heavens. All religion is man seeking his way up to God. But the Christian faith, truly understood, is the antithesis of that. It's saying, no, it's God reaching down to man and bringing him up to be where he is. And so it's a revelation of who God is, and it's a redemption. So I would, I'll often say to folk, no, I'm not religious, because religion is really ultimately about what we do, and it's about us. As you said, we have to worship God, we have to do this, we do, and if we do it right, God will let us in. And the Christian faith actually says, no, let's get past all of that, because in fact, you can't do anything that you cannot do what God requires you to be. Because see, to come back to what it truly means to be human, where do we see true humanity? Where do you see the humanity that describes what we really are, what we really ought to be, what we're made for, and how we are? And the Christian answer is, well, we see that actually in the human flesh of Jesus. There's where you see true humanity. And actually, interestingly, in the letter to the Hebrews in the New Testament, the writer quotes from the Psalm that I was quoting, Psalm 8 earlier on, and says, we don't yet see human beings as they should be. We don't see them ruling over the world as images of God in all things rightly. We don't see any of that. But what we do see is we see Jesus Christ. We see in him. And you see, I take great comfort in the fact that we've all been terribly let down, haven't we? And that's one of the things that I think people who are more thoughtful about recent years have come to that conclusion. We've been terribly let down by authority figures, by institutions, by so many things that we put trust in. Governments, industries, multinational organizations, the health, so many things. People, as you said, everybody got it wrong. We've been desperately let down. And it's easy then to become so cynical that we think we can't trust anybody. We can't trust that you just, as well, like you said, you just don't know. But I take great comfort in the fact that there is nothing that Jesus Christ ever did or said that I'm ashamed of, or that I distrust, or I think I think means I can't trust him. And so it's a wonderful thing to know that you can't put your trust in man. The Bible's central message is don't put your trust in man. There's no hope in man, but you can trust in God. And so but God, who's not unknown, who's not far away, who's not distant, but has revealed himself in the flesh, and someone I can look at and say, well, I'm willing to trust you. I will trust you, because nothing that you've said or done erodes that in the way that I can't say about almost anything else in life now. So for me, that's the thing. All I would say to you, Ahmed, is, you're looking at all these things. I understand that. I know it's difficult for people, but I would just say, look, forget about all the fluff, forget about all the people that you can point to and say, this is all a mess, and just go right to the man. And
so I don't doubt, like, I'm sure Jesus existed, and I think he was an incredible human being. I think he was a real rebel. Yeah. I think he was a freedom fighter. Yeah. My personal opinion is he was the ultimate freedom fighter.
Well, not a violent fighter.
No.
He was certainly a populist.
Yeah.
I mean, he would have been.
Okay, let's just say a freedom lover then.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, but I'm a freedom lover. You're a freedom lover. Yeah. So he was the ultimate freedom lover, and he was a dissident. He was a dissident, and he got punished by the hierarchy and the establishment for being different and calling out all the flaws and the corruptions. And the thing is, when you look back 2,000 years, you think, oh, everybody was very primitive 2,000 years ago. People don't realize, actually, there's very little difference. There was just no electricity and no power motor, but there was trade, finance, legal contracts. There were human beings just like us.
And a very sophisticated culture.
A very sophisticated culture. There's music, art, politics. And, these places were states, and you had an empire just like the United States with its garrisons and bases, and they're subjugating people, and there was people who wanted to revolt, and there was this
hasn't changed.
Complicated system going on, very similar to what we see today.
Yeah.
But I just don't know. I just don't trust history. I don't trust, take for example, the Bible. Which Bible are we talking about? Are we talking about King James? I don't think King James would have had anything in the Bible that would have been critical of the royal family or the position of power for those kind of individuals. So which Bible?
Well,
which source? Yeah. And I've been reading some stuff that talks about Jesus being this rebel, and Christianity was co-opted by the Roman Empire, and it was a psyop, and all these other fantastic theories. And the thing is, I just don't know. I don't know.
Well, again, all I say is you just have to, once you get into all of that, you get all kinds of views of all different people. I just say you just have to go back to the original thing.
Which original Bible would you go to?
Well, look, any English translation that we have is based on all kinds of very, very well attested manuscripts and so on. Now, since the King James Version, which was done in 1611, there have been lots more discoveries and lots more ancient versions.
Because there's whole bits of the Bible that weren't in that King James one. Am I not right?
No. I mean, the King James Version was translated based on pretty much the same Hebrew text as any modern ones are, but a different Greek text, a complete Greek text called the Textus Receptus. But more fragments have been discovered since then, and I mean the differences are marginal. You're right about James having political ideas. So he'd come down from Scotland, and he found the church in Scotland very uncongenial to him, because the ministers there would stand up to him and treat him like an ordinary sinner, like everybody else, and he didn't like that. He came down to England, and he found that the church had bishops and they were all pretty venal, and they all wanted preferment. And he found he could control things much better because he had bishops. So he tried to impose bishops in Scotland. And it's interesting that the King James Version uses the term bishops in various places, where most modern translations now would use the term overseer, but he used the term bishop. I mean, it's just a translation of the Greek word episkopos. Quite funny, because some of the people today, there's some purists in the Christian church who say, oh, we must only have the King James Version. But they're often people who are very against things like bishops and celebrating the season of Christmas and Easter. And actually, the King James Version is the only version of the Bible that mentions the word Easter. So there were some political things in there. But honestly, the differences you're talking about, they're tiny, minuscule. And any decent modern version of the Bible, a New International Version, the English Standard Version, you can be pretty sure you're reading something that is very, very close to the original manuscript. So I wouldn't want, it's very, very, very well attested. If you go into the scholarship of all of these things, there's vastly more evidence for these biblical manuscripts than there are for almost any other things in history. We've got far more ancient manuscripts of these than we have of Roman historians and all the rest of people that, that are cited as.
Do you know what I found out recently? That the oldest version of the Old Testament is only about 300 years BC, and it's written in Greek. It's not even written in Hebrew. Did you know that?
The oldest extant, it's the Septuagint, the Greek version of the Old Testament. Yeah, but there are multiple parts of the different parts of the Old Testament in Hebrew scriptures going back a long time before that.
Okay, let's talk about where you fit in as a dissident.
Yeah.
Right? Because I'm a dissident doctor.
Yeah.
You're a doctor as well. I mean, you're always a doctor, aren't you? Do you not always feel like you're partly a doctor?
I suppose so.
But where did you fit in the church? Because the church is closing all the doors. Yeah. I know they're closing all the doors. They were telling people to social distance.
Yeah.
Where did you fit with that? Did you go along at any point, or did you just from the get-go say, no, this isn't right? And how did that fit with the rest of the church that you're with?
Yeah, well, we...
Because it's Church of Scotland, or?
No. We left the Church of Scotland about 12 years ago, as it was, we believe, increasingly departing from real Christianity, just becoming liberalized and woke and accepting LGBT ideology and all the rest of it. So
Scotland has gone very woke.
Yeah. Well, since we had the Scottish Parliament, it's accelerated because you've only got a single chamber Parliament. You've got no restraining second chamber. There's multiple reasons for it, and also, Scotland wants to show itself different from England, and
it's that race, that virtue signaling,
all of
trying to outdo.
But look, right back at the very beginning when it all started. It was very sudden. It was very dramatic. When we were first locked down, I think I would say we, along with others, just thought, okay, 3 weeks to flatten the curve. This seems to be what they're saying. They know what they're doing. But I was suspicious right from the very beginning. And within a matter of a few weeks, I would say, I was looking very, very closely at what's going on. I was looking at figures, looking at death things, looking at what's going on in nursing homes and so on. I was very responsible. I have a congregation of 500 odd people, all ages. Our actual average age is very low compared to most churches. It's in the 30s, but we've got
that's quite young.
Yeah, we've got older people. I was concerned for them, obviously. So I was looking into all of this, and the more I began to look into it, it just became obvious that this was not a killer pandemic in the way we've known of these before. People were dying, of course they were, but it was very elderly people. It was people already sick, totally different to, Spanish flu or these things. Began to see that this was something not right here. And then as it dragged on, very quickly began to see the enormous damage that was being done to people by the stoking of fear. It seemed to be very quickly that fear was the biggest problem, and people were being terrified and people were being isolated. And the lockdown was so damaging. My wife was still working then as a psychiatrist in child and adolescent psychiatry. She was in at work every single day, and their caseload was burgeoning. You can imagine the sort of thing that this was doing to autistic children and people with difficulties and so on. I was seeing it in so many other. One of my colleagues, within the space of 1 week, pulled 2 youngsters off the railway tracks at a station in Glasgow.
Oh, wow.
Within the space of a week. Actually, one of them, my daughter was with him. We were just beginning to see things. We got people who are treated with drug addiction and so on. They were seeing just how devastating this was for folk. So I got together with a few other local ministers. We wrote an open letter to the Scottish government, published it in the Herald, saying, "Look, we need churches open. We need to get people back together. You need churches. People need to be able to meet in safe places. Well,
Socialize.
There's no safer place than that. You're talking about maybe getting pubs and things open. For goodness sake, let's get churches. You need our help here, because the real problem is fear, and getting people out of this fear is going to prove a much bigger problem than you realize. And of course, that was very early on, but that became a huge issue. I then managed to get together with some others. We wrote an open letter to the Prime Minister, saying, "Look, lockdowns are damaging, far more damaging now than any benefit they're bringing." And then there was a few more of those things kind of followed on. Well, of course, we went into the second lockdown, and that was where Scotland was different, because in England, certain things were still open, including all places of worship, because I think the government realised this is crazy. And in fact, there had been a threat of a judicial review against the government, which made them, I think realise. But of course, in Scotland, if Boris did this, then Nicola had to do that. And so churches, all places of worship, were still to be closed at the second lockdown. And actually, it was even more than that. It wasn't just about buildings. It was that 2 people meeting together in a park in the open air to say a prayer together, that became a criminal offence, regardless of your particular faith. So we felt that was a very, very damaging thing. So we threatened with a group of others. We threatened a judicial review and wrote saying, "This is you can't do this. It's actually unconstitutional, and it's also in breach of the European Convention of Human Rights and so on." So we took the government to court. They wouldn't back down.
The Scottish government.
The Scottish government, and we won. We were one of the very, very few, in fact, possibly even the only successful judicial review at that time, and it happened it finally came to court in about I think it was March of 2021. But in fact, the government knew they were going to lose, and they then undid the lockdown for churches just before Easter that year. So we were kind of pretty persona non grata. But what discouraged me the most about it was that almost all of the denominations, almost all of the establishment churches were on the government side against us. We had very, very few who thought that this was even the right thing to do. We were being told by people, "How can you challenge the government? You must support the government."
So they've put the government above God.
Yeah, ultimately, I mean, one more than one.
Isn't that disappointing?
Yeah, more than one Christian leader said, our highest duty in this circumstance is to obey and support the government. I think that's just fundamentally wrong. Now, to be fair, there were quite a lot of people who, this always happens, doesn't it, who didn't support that, didn't support us, but who afterwards said, you were right about that and we should have. Not that many, I have to say.
Bring the mic a little bit closer. It keeps dropping a bit.
Sure. So, yeah.
Well, I mean, the fact that you even had some people come back to you and say, you were right, that's incredible, because most people...
Yeah. We were not doing it to be rabble rousers. We were doing it because we genuinely believed that it was a very wrong thing to ban public worship of any kind. But we also believed it was a damaging thing way beyond that. And, we had to do it for churches because that was our background. But I equally thought it was terrible that so many other things were closed and businesses were going to the wall. And, the fact is that historically, religious freedom and civil freedom are very closely connected together. When one goes, the other goes. I mean, people don't read history, do they? But that's the problem. But you don't look back very far in our own nation and certainly in other countries to realize that...
You weren't even allowed to read the Bible.
Yeah, that's
You
right.
know, the Bible was not meant to be written in English. It was meant to be in Latin. It was only the priestly class that was meant to read it.
One of the things that was very interesting to me was that I watched. I read a biography during that time of Dietrich Bonhoeffer. You probably know the name, but he was one of the German churchmen who was ultimately murdered by the Nazis. He stood up against Hitler, was imprisoned, and died in a concentration camp. And he, when he was arrested, in this film, anyway, it was depicting, and I don't know if this actually happened or, but certainly something like it. The Gestapo officer took out the Bible, turned to Romans chapter 13, and read from there about how Paul says the powers that be are ordained of God, and you need to be subjected to them as Christians. You're not exempt, in other words, from the rules of this world. And he then said to Bonhoeffer, "Well, here you are, Mr. Bonhoeffer. You're going against your own Bible." And I just thought, you know, there's a lot of Christian leaders today who would say exactly the same thing to Dietrich Bonhoeffer. They all think Bonhoeffer's a wonderful hero who stood up to the Nazis and all the rest of it, but actually, they were in the place of the Gestapo officer, not Dietrich Bonhoeffer, and there just seemed to be an extraordinary blindness there. And so, yeah, Christians got very confused, but we felt it was really important that the public could hear that there are some church leaders who are standing for the truth here. And I mean,
Is that what inspired your podcast?
No, not. I mean, I did lots of interviews with lots of people around that, because obviously my name was out there as being involved with the judicial review. That's how I got involved with Heart and various other things. I got sometimes on to I was on a lot of news things about the case, and then I got a few interviews and things on with Neil Oliver and people like that, and so on. Because what people were saying is, where's the church? Who's speaking up for this? There was an article actually in the Times, I think, written by Simon Heffer, who's an atheist, but it was early on in the pandemic, and the headline was something like, "Where's the church at a time of national crisis?" And he was saying, well, you know, they've all run away, and the Archbishop of Canterbury is hiding in his kitchen.
Yeah,
and I felt so ashamed. But I thought, this is terrible. You know, he's right. Here's an atheist excoriating the church for being absent in a time of public need.
Do you know when they even said you can open up the churches? Half of the churches decided to stay closed.
Well, not half. More than half.
Yeah. Well, I'm talking about here down in England. Yeah. They could have stayed open.
Yeah.
But they chose to keep it closed. And I'm just like, what?
Yeah. It was extraordinary. There were many churches who took the government guidelines and went even further.
Yes.
Added something on top. But I mean, that is the nature of human rules-based religion. You get rules and you add some on top just to make sure you're in the clear. And it was very disappointing. The church did not come out of the pandemic well. And I feel ashamed of that. I can't. I'm part of that. It's a shameful thing. But that's why
I feel the same shame for my medical profession.
Yeah,
it's no different.
Yeah, and I feel that too. I mean, I think medics were among the worst culprits, actually, in many cases, because they went along with the scaremongering, went along with the fear. And
there's actually quite a lot of similarities and parallels between the clergy and the medical profession.
Yeah, there are.
So we should have defended medical ethics. We should know about informed consent, bodily autonomy, all these things that are very, very important.
Yeah.
We should have been the guardians of those, and we completely abandoned them. Doctors were like, we should mandate vaccines. I could not believe that. Oh, if you're not vaccinated, we should deny them, transplants and medical care. That's their fault. They were unvaccinated. That's their fault. Are you hearing yourself speak?
Yeah.
And just like the clergy, they forgot the spiritual side of things. Because if doctors tend the physical body, the clergy are meant to tend the spiritual body. And it was almost like in parallel, the doctors and the clergy abandoned their whole purpose. The clergy are meant to stand up for God. Do not fear anyone but God. Do not fear these things, this virus or whatever. Have faith in God. And they abandoned it and they cowered. And the doctors, same. Instead of championing and defending the medical ethics, abandoned it and turned vicious.
Very vicious. And the sad thing is that I'm afraid the medical profession has got a very bad track record on this.
Oh, yeah.
The medical profession were the handmaidens of the Nazi grotesque crimes, and the same very very much under communism, particularly in the Soviet era. Yeah.
Why do you think that is?
Well, I think, I don't know, but it's something to do with the medical profession in our modern era have become like a priesthood for secular people. You know, in the past, people would go to their clergyman and talk about things. Now it's often to their doctor, isn't it, their GP, and so I think there's a sense of that. There's a sense of we are special, we're the elite, we know better, and I think, yeah, it's very disappointing. I mean, but as I say, it's a long track record. I came across a very interesting paper that was published. I think it was in the New England Journal of Medicine in the 1950s, and it was about medicine under totalitarianism and under the Nazis, and it was fascinating to read because it was horrific as to how the medical profession were used as instruments by the Nazis. They were
the highest membership of any profession in the Nazi Party.
Terrible. There was one country, interestingly, where they resisted, and that was Holland. And in the early days, when they were being told, what you're doing here is about public health, it's about making people fitter, it's about making a healthier society, but they saw through it all. They realized it was all about using people. It was all about totalitarian control and so on, and they resisted. It was the only place. And I actually wrote an article for the Critic, and I was referring to this, and it was about the time of the vaccine mandates, and it was before the mandates, but it was when they were being absolutely hammered. People were being given, free sweets for getting kids vaccinated, and even in some cases, a free night with a prostitute.
Really?
Yeah. I think that was in Holland or Austria? It was. Yeah, I mean, it was absolutely
definitely burgers in America and stuff like that.
Unbelievable. But I was just pointing out, making this allusion to that under the Nazis, and I really got it in the neck for that. Some of the doctors some of my medical friends really never forgave me for that, and I was just trying to warn and say, look, we need to realize this is a very powerful force. You flatter a profession, and then you use them. But yeah, it was.
I've got my own theories. I think through med school we've been conditioned to groupthink. Yeah. It's very conditioning. Yeah. Even the process of med school, it's like going through army camp. Yeah. It's brutal. Yeah. And it's to then break you and then rewrite on top of you, if that makes sense. And then you're conformist. Because if you're a maverick and stand out and are different, people point fingers at you and everything. So you're a conformist.
And I think that's particularly true today, isn't it? In that school students who are selected for medicine, they have to be conformist because you've got all these things and all these. It's a very conformist type of person who will do all of that needs to get in.
100%. And then the other thing is that as doctors, we're put up on a pedestal, and the only place that you can go from a pedestal is fall off it. I don't think doctors should be on a pedestal. I don't think anybody should be on a pedestal, frankly. And there's a lot of hubris and arrogance that goes along with it. Like you said, we know what's best. And then, and I'm afraid there is a massive financial element to it. They expect a certain lifestyle. They have to pay off their debts. They have to, it's not easy. You make money quite later on in life when you're a bit more established. And so all these people, they think, no, why am I going to speak out and question? I'm going to go along and further my career and enhance it and play along to get along.
Yeah.
And that's the problem. It's too conformist, not enough free thinkers.
I think that's true in a lot of professions now, isn't it? And it's the really nefarious thing about ideological censorship. It's not the actual censorship, but it's the self-censoring that then produces. So people will say, well, I can't say that because I'll get a black mark and I won't get promoted, or I can't say this. And so people increasingly self-censor and they just go along with it, put the head down. But I mean, that's just a mark of totalitarian culture, isn't it? I mean,
so it tells you where we are today.
Yeah. Yes, it does. We've self-censored, and there's an American Christian, an Orthodox Christian, who's wrote a book called "Live Not by Lies," and he took it out of the essay by Solzhenitsyn, who, when he was expelled from Russia under the Soviets, having been in the gulags for a long time, he wrote this essay to
Incredible, man.
Yeah, saying, live not by lies. Don't live by these lies, because they're winning just because you go along with the lies. It's not you have to lie, but you just don't call out the lie. And so in this book, he's saying, really, look, Western culture today is already overcome by what he calls soft totalitarianism. In other words, it's not jackboots yet, but he said actually it's worse because we've instead of in Eastern Europe, they used to put listening devices in people's houses and so on. And he says now we put them in our own houses, because we sell everything on social media. We sell our data. Big Brother is listening to us. And we're doing it all just to get free things and to get free use of social media and all this sort of stuff. But, we've welcomed all of this, and we're living already under a self-censorship. We're imposing that sort of totalitarian conformity on ourselves. And he's saying, look, that's very dangerous. And the next step is that it won't be soft anymore. And people have to wake up to it. And so the first part of the book, he's saying, look, this is where we are now in the West. And the second half, he's saying, well, how do we get out of it? Well, we have to learn from those who lived under the hard totalitarianism, and we have to see how they resisted. And he travels around Eastern Europe, and he speaks to people who remember these days and how they had little cells meeting in their houses where they would keep together intellectual thought, questioning, all these sorts of things that the communists, banished. And it was interesting because it was very, very often Christian people, not exclusively, but Christians were very much at the heart of all of that. They were dissidents, and they didn't lie down. It wasn't just them. There were other intellectuals and academics and so on. But ultimately, they preserved their real cultures so that as communism eventually fell in upon itself, there was something there to emerge. And I think
communism is very anti-God.
Yeah, absolutely.
Communism, if you look at the manifesto and you look at what it's all about, is the opposite of the family unit.
Yeah,
you must destroy the God. You must destroy
God. You must destroy family.
The sexes.
And you must destroy the sexes. You must destroy a sense of sort of statehood. And so everything is out except for the state. And in fact,
and then they are the arbiter of what's right and what's wrong.
Absolutely.
They tell you what the right morals are.
Yeah.
What the right value system.
Well,
that's what's dangerous.
Very dangerous. Now we saw.
And so while I'm not a Christian or a Muslim or a Jew, I appreciate.
Yeah.
The beautiful message that can be found in all of these faiths, including Buddhism and Taoism and whatever. And that's not to say that someone like me, who doesn't follow a specific religion, cannot decide what's right and wrong. My mum, for example, was like, but what are you going to teach your children? How will they grow up to be good children? And I joke about it because then when she comes over, I go, are my children good? She goes, they're the best. And I go, do we go to the mosque or the church? I don't need a religion to teach them what's right and what's wrong, and I teach them about God, and there's just no intermediary, and that's and she was like, okay, but I do value religion. That's the thing, I'm kind of like hypocritical because I think a lot of them are captured and co-opted, but I also think if we got rid of religion, there would be no resistance to the one world government and totalitarianism. We need people of faith.
Yeah. Well, and often and historically, certainly in this nation, it has been faith. It has been the church that has stood up against tyranny. I mean, even just recently, when was it? A decade or so ago in Scotland, we had this dreadful thing called the named person scheme. Do you remember that? Where the Scottish government was wanting every child under 16 in the nation to have a named person, named by the state, to have responsibility for these children. So who could overrule parents, who could, have direct control, who would get to see all the medical records, all the school records, everything. I mean, it was absolutely frightening. And it was hugely opposed across the board, but particularly it was driven by Christians. I'm a trustee of something called the Christian Institute, which is an organization that seeks to defend the nation against some of these things. And it went all the way to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court found against the Scottish government. And in the Supreme Court's, in the words that they used to dismiss the case, they actually said, this is totalitarian. And they said the first thing a totalitarian regime tries to do is to get at the children, to sever them from their parents, from their values, from the schemes, and to make them only answerable to the state. Now, that's very powerful language. That's coming from the highest court in this land, and it was against the Scottish government. Now, those totalitarian tendencies have always been there, and they're still there. And it's very much I'm afraid, in evidence in Scotland. But it's actually, that's what we saw coming to the fore in COVID. That's what we see coming in many other things. And so that's why, as a churchman, I felt it was really important for us to be involved in the public fray in that, because, well, as a Christian, the Lord Jesus says you're to love your neighbor. Well, that doesn't mean being nice to your neighbor by just saying, oh, don't make a fuss, let anything happen to you, because I don't want to make a fuss. No, it's saying actually love you, which means protect you, help you, show you when you're completely wrong,
Absolutely.
show you when you're being tyrannized, fight for you. Do that. Now, that's what Christians have always done in the past. And so, yeah, I think freedoms are very much under attack today. I think freedom of speech is fundamental to that. And I think that's why many across the board, Christians, people of other faiths, atheists, Toby Young is I think still an atheist, but he's started up the Free Speech Union, which is now got a very important role in society, because right across the board, people are being censured and censored and cancelled just for having the wrong view. And that's a very, very, very dangerous situation to get to in society. We've got to be able to have civil discourse, but disagree violently. We've got to be able to have the ability to argue,
freedom of speech is also my right to offend.
Yes, absolutely. So
it's not my responsibility if you get upset. If you get upset, I'm sorry. I'm sorry that you got upset. But
yes. we need freedom to offend. That doesn't mean that we should be offensive people. So but we need, unfortunately, you have to allow for that offensiveness. There are people who will be very offensive. Well, in a mature culture, I hope that we can show each other, well, there's ways of disagreeing without resorting.
And if you're offensive, then you show yourself up and everyone else sees you for who you are. And isn't that just what you want? You want people to see rather than bottle it up and hide it and conceal it.
Precisely.
Great. Let the pus out. You know the saying. If there's pus about, let it out. But
it's very, very important, isn't it, that we're able to have violent disagreement without it becoming a violent sort of enemy situation. This is the problem now, that you can, if you disagree with me, you are my enemy, and you're evil, and I'm good.
Yeah, I can't like you. Yes. I can't be your friend.
Yeah,
I can't talk to you.
Yeah.
It's just ridiculous.
Well, it's ridiculous, but it's also dangerous, isn't it?
Yes.
Because then that does shut down, and one side says, well, no, we can't have this. We've got to stop you saying that, because we can't have this disagreement happening, because it gets all out of control. So, no, we need freedom of speech, but we also need a desire for wholesome and civil discourse. We've become very, very polarized. If you're on this side and I'm on this side, well, we must hate each other. Well, no. We can be on this side of an argument, on this side of an argument, but actually be very good friends.
Exactly. Listen, I've just looked at the time. It's already past 2:30, and I need to drop you off and then pick up my son and daughter.
Great.
We need to wrap up. This went really fast.
Yeah, it has.
This went super fast. Oh my goodness. I could talk to you about so much more. I feel like we've only scratched the surface.
I'm sure we have. But we've talked about a lot of things. So.
But there's one question, and it's my signature question. So basically, you're on your deathbed many years from now. Before you meet your maker, what would you say to your loved ones who are surrounding you? What words of wisdom would you impart on them?
I would just say to them, I would simply say, have no fear in death, and continue the walk of faith in life. Follow the Lord and love Him with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and you won't go wrong. Yeah, and if I'm still saying that on my deathbed, I'll be pleased. I'll be happy.
Lovely. I think it's a great place to end. Listen, thank you so much, and thank you for all the work that you've been doing. You've been working with heart. You've been working for your church, leading by example, fighting for freedom, speaking out against all the nonsense, and it doesn't come without a cost and without attacks. And so well done for being brave and living, not just saying, live without fear, but actually, walking the walk. Well done.
Well, thank you. And thank you for being bold and courageous as well.
I try. Like I said before, I don't see how, if you've got kids, you wouldn't want to fight for them. That picture's there as a reminder all the time. You know, I'm doing it so they have a better future ahead of them than the one that's being prepared by the bad people.
Yeah.
But we will win.
Yeah,
I have no doubt of that.
Truth wins.
Exactly. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I, Ahmed Malik, am a private civilian protected by the Geneva Convention. My Substack, social media posts, and podcasts are my personal experiences, observations, and opinions. This information is for educational purposes only. Although I am a doctor, I am not your doctor, and I am not providing medical or legal advice to you or to the wider public. I am not licensed or registered with the GMC or any other licensing board. The responsibility for the interpretation, due diligence, and use of the information from my Substack and my podcast lies with you, the viewer and/or listener. Please do your research and use your discernment. It is not my intention to harass, intimidate, offend, defame, conspire, blackmail, coerce, or cause anxiety, alarm, or distress to any man or woman, and the information presented here is done so with peaceful and honourable intentions. Enjoy, folks.